But I want to be clear that there is never, ever a good reason for posting your children online for money or fame.
The young woman, whose name has become synonymous with her mother's horrific abuse, is speaking out now on her own terms, slamming the family vlogging industry. Shari Franke says her mom's obsession with fame and money meant she had to grow up online in front of millions of people. Well, now she is advocating for stricter regulations to protect other vulnerable kids. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Shari Franke, she is the oldest child of Kevin and Ruby Franke, the creators of the popular YouTube channel 8 Passengers. This chronicled the lives of the Utah parents and their 6 children for years, eventually amassing a following of around 2.5 million subscribers. But as we know, last year, everything changed. The family went viral for other reasons when Shari's youngest brother showed up at a home in Ivins, Utah, emaciated, covered in open wounds, asking the homeowner to call 911.
Yes.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could do 2 favors.
Well, what are they?
Taking me to the nearest police station. Well, actually, just one's fine.
What's going on, son? Have a seat there.
It's personal business.
Have a seat. What's your name? How'd you get here?
The 12-year-old and his 10-year-old sister had been held in a neighbor's home for months. To be more precise, the home of Jody Hildebrand. This is their mother, Ruby Franke's spiritual mentor, mental health counselor, Jody Hildebrand. And these kids were tortured at the hands of their mother, Ruby, and at Hildebrand. And the 2 women had come to the conclusion that the children were evil, that evil had to be removed no matter the cost. The women were arrested in August of 2023. They were denied bail, and eventually, Ruby and Jody, they didn't go to trial. They pled guilty to 4 of the 6 counts of aggravated child abuse that they were facing. They were sentenced to spend at least 4 years in prison before the parole board will decide if and when they'll be released. Now, theoretically, they could be looking up to 30 years in prison. Ruby had claimed, though, that Jody had brainwashed her into hurting her children. Jody said she never intended to hurt anyone. But here's the thing, by the time Ruby had moved her youngest children from their family home in Springville, Utah, to the St. George area, she had stopped posting on the 8 Passengers channel, and it was eventually removed by YouTube, although no real reason was really ever given as to why that happened at that point. But in its heyday, Ruby Franke reportedly posted seemingly every day, Monday through Friday, starting early in the morning. She filmed just about everything from dinner to chores to sporting events to family vacations. Ruby offered parenting and childcare advice, often connecting it back to the family's Mormon beliefs. Major life moments for the 6 children. They were captured on film, put online for anyone and everyone to see. And as we know, once something's on the internet, it lives there forever. And that was one of the points made by Shari Franke when she spoke in front of the Business and Labor Interim Committee at the Utah Legislature last week. Shari, who's now 21 years old, was estranged from her parents when her mother was arrested. In fact, on the day of her mother's arrest in August of 2023, Shari posted a photo of police in a neighborhood saying, "Finally." She also wrote, "Today has been a big day. Me and my family are so glad justice is being served. We've been trying to tell the police and CPS for years about this, and so glad they finally decided to step up. Kids are safe, but there's a long road ahead. Please keep them in your prayers and also respect their privacy." We know that Shari called Springville police in September of 2022, the year before this arrest, asking for a welfare check on her siblings. She had claimed that her brothers and sisters had been left at home alone while their mother was in St. George with a friend. Shari told them that she got a call from a neighbor who said that the kids had been alone for 5 days. This Franke case, every time I talk about it, is always heartbreaking. It is always tough. And look, we want to keep you updated on any developments that happen in this story. I mean, we've been following it for, over a year? And the reason we can do that, the reason we can continue to analyze and break down what happens in stories like this is because we get amazing support from our sponsors, and that includes one I want to call out right now, Upside. Now, if you don't know what Upside is, it's awesome. It is a free app that helps you get cash back when you buy gas, groceries, food, real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can then transfer right into your bank account. It is so easy to use. Look here, I used Upside to find a gas station. I claimed an offer, paid with my credit card at the pump, followed the steps on the app. Guess what? I got cash back. And you can use Upside at all different kinds of places, restaurants, convenience stores. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code Sidebar and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Hope you can check it out. As for Kevin Franke, this is the children's father, he had reportedly been forced out of the home at Jodi Hildebrandt's suggestion and was living elsewhere. He claims he had no idea what was going on with his kids. He had no idea what was happening during this time. And then he ultimately filed for divorce from Ruby when she was arrested. According to Kevin, Jodi Hildebrandt instructed the children and Ruby not to answer the door if the Department of Child and Family Services came knocking. Without a warrant, social workers or police really couldn't enter the home. Kevin, by the way, is now working with the Utah legislature to update child welfare rules, saying there are too many loopholes in the system. And Shari is now working with lawmakers to make changes of her own. And so we have a lot to get into here regarding what changes are trying to be made in light of what is a horrific, horrific case of child abuse. So to talk about this, I got the chance to sit down once again with friend of the show, KUTV 2 News reporter and anchor Brian Schnee, who has been following this from the very beginning. Let's see what Brian had to say. Before we even get into what Shari said, can you provide us a quick update on the work that's underway in the legislature to address some of the major flaws in Utah's child welfare system? Because that's another tangential but very important issue that's happening as well.
Yeah, there was a discussion a few weeks ago in which Kevin Franke went on and testified in front of another committee of sorts, talking specifically about welfare, how the system is working, and clearly with a number of pieces of evidence is not working. I mean, it's not just the Ruby Franke, Jodi Hildebrandt case that is brought up. We've had other instances here in Utah where other children have been harmed. I hate to even compare, but far worse, to death in the last 6 months or so. So there's a lot of conversations about what is working when it comes to noticing children in schools, noticing behaviors, patterns, kids that are starving, kids that are not able to have access to food, and then ultimately are removed from school. And that's part of the bigger conversation that Kevin Franke was a part of just a few weeks ago, calling on lawmakers to do something, to notice more conversations about how the people that are directly involved need to be involved in the process in the after fact of a lot of the things that are taking place here. But there's a number of instances regarding child welfare, child abuse, even child torture that have been discussed just in the last few weeks.
Don't you find that interesting, considering in this story, child agencies checked on the Frankes. They were there. They checked on Kevin. And now he is in this position, and we've, quite documented Kevin's history throughout this, but it's interesting that he is advocating that they need to do more. There might be deficiencies in that system.
Yeah, I think he's looking at his own personal situation and wanting to make some changes here, because it's not just the Frankes. I mean, there was a 12-year-old boy named Gavin Peterson in West Haven, Utah, that died because of the actions of the family, because of parents, because of another sibling. And that struck a chord with him. I think it's very clear, because that could have been his children if something wasn't done. If, one of the children didn't escape that home in Ivins that day and get the call for help that they so badly needed, we could be having a very different conversation as it pertains to that family right now. So the courageous acts of one of those children may have changed the outcome, which we've discussed before. I feel like Kevin wants to instill any change as possible. We've talked about that at length. He's talked to a number of folks here when he's gone to Utah's Capitol Hill, not just this time, but he's been there before in the last few months to try to see what can be done here, because it's about noticing those signs early on, whether it's a mandated reporter like a teacher, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's oddities in the neighborhood. Listen, DCFS in any state is going to have issues right now, whether it's with staffing or the amount of caseloads that they're looking at one point. And they're probably doing what those caseloads require, checking up on families. But if you're not noticing things one time and you're noticing things maybe a little too late, we very well have seen from cases all over the country what can happen when something is missed or when something falls through the cracks.
I do want to focus now on what Shari had to say, because this is different. This is different. And I want to play some of what she had to say last week. Let's take a listen.
I don't come today as the daughter of a felon, nor as a victim of an abnormally abusive mother. I come today as a victim of family vlogging. My goal is not to present any idea of a solution to this problem, but to shed light on the ethical and monetary issues that come from being a child influencer. When children become stars in their family's online content, they become child influencers. It is more than just filming your family life and putting it online. It is a full-time job with employees, business credit cards, managers, and marketing strategies. The difference between family vlogging and a normal business, however, is that all the children are employees. Children from before they are born to the day they turn 18 have become the stars of family businesses on YouTube, Instagram, and other social media platforms. Utah is specifically a hotspot for family content due to the LDS culture around family and the goal to share the church with the world. We also have large families, which makes family content more lucrative. Specifically, many parents film their regular family life as an online video blog called a vlog. But I want to be clear that there is never, ever a good reason for posting your children online for money or fame. There is no such thing as a moral or ethical family vlogger.
Now, Brian, so she's advocating protection, not the physical protection necessarily of the kids, but make sure they're not financially exploited, that their financial interests are protected. That was a big statement from her.
Well, first, I want to say Shari was very heartfelt with her remarks, clearly laid out everything she wanted to say in about 5 minutes time, and was very strong and courageous in those, in kind of a nerve-wracking situation to talk in front of a committee there about some personal points in her life. And I thought the bribery portion was interesting because she's talking about how she never sees that money or sees it much later in life, but would have done it all over again differently if she had a choice to have an empty bank account now, right, as she alluded to in those comments, versus being exploited. She also talks about the child predators that are online, looking specifically maybe for some of these children that were in some of these videos, really showed a lot of examples about how this, in her eyes, is extremely wrong, and brought up good examples about the state of Utah. Large families, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which the world has a lot of interest in, whether you're a member of that faith or not. And I think she hit on a lot of good points that probably struck a nerve with that committee there. There's no bill crafted right now, but these are under the child influencer protections discussions that will likely continue at this point.
And we know that there have been efforts made in other states, actually legislation passed in other states to protect the, the financial compensation of child vloggers and social media stars. She also, what I thought was really interesting, she kind of pulled back the curtain on what happens behind the scenes when someone is a social media or YouTube star. And people might not be aware of this. Take a look.
Many child influencers are paid for their work, as I was, and this money has helped me in my adult life. However, this payment was usually a bribe. For example, we'd be rewarded $100 or a shopping trip if we filmed a particularly embarrassing moment or an exciting event in our lives. Or other times, simply going on vacation was expected to be payment enough because most kids don't get to go on regular and expensive trips. Never mind the fact that the child's labor is actually what paid for the vacation or trip. There is no law in place to guarantee that child influencers get any money from their work. If a family account does not become an LLC, parents are taxed heavily for paying their children. But parents also receive tax write-offs for the regular clothes that they wear, the gas money used to drive places, and even the houses they live in. Anything that is filmed can be written off. And even after registering their business as an LLC, there is no guarantee that children will get paid. Any payment that does happen is under the table with no paper trail. And how do we determine how much a child should make from appearing in family content? What price is worth giving up your childhood? But despite any monetary payment children may receive, don't let this excuse the 24/7 labor that these children are subjected to. As a child, I was fully aware that I was an employee. The business was successful when I was happy or when I shared my hardships with the world. Some of our most popular videos were when my eyebrow was accidentally waxed off and the whole world saw a crying teenager when I just wanted to mourn in private. Or the time I was violently ill and got the leading role in the video that day. My friends became scarce because dates were filmed and none of my friends wanted to be on camera. The camera never stops and there is no such thing as a break from filming. At the time, I tell you I had a choice in what was filmed, but I've come to learn that every child influencer, in a way, suffers from Stockholm Syndrome.
Stockholm Syndrome, Brian. I mean, that she is really somebody who hasn't been necessarily that vocal leading up into the criminal case of her mother and Jodi Hildebrandt, really laying it out right here.
I feel like she's probably had a lot of time to process this and wait for the right moment with her representation to put this all out there, because you've gotten the sense that Sherry on social media, maybe on her Instagram stories or something, has always wanted to say more, despite denying the conversations with members of the media or wanting to be interviewed in that way. Kind of wants to do it at her own pace. And I think this was a way that maybe she wanted to do that to make the most impact. And I totally respect that too, because she's got the perspective that very few of us have. But she makes a good point about the state of Utah in general and how this is not just a Ruby Franke situation, but this is all of her family that was doing this. If you look at the extended family of Ruby Franke, they're all family vloggers, right? Even Ruby's parents had vlogs and had a significant following too. It wasn't just her immediate feeling on this. She was surrounded by this, Jesse. She was surrounded by this even if she went over to her aunt and uncle's house, right? I mean, there was a chance she would show up in a video there. So this is something that was very real for her upbringing, along with her siblings. And she's putting it out there for the world to see. It's already been put out, right, in video form, but now is advocating on behalf of the future of what she feels needs to change.
And as we talk about what that change could be, she expands upon it a little bit more. Let's listen.
In any other context, it is understood that children cannot give consent, but for some reason, people think family vlogging is different. I did not realize the impact that filming as a child would have on me now. My social media became flooded with rumors of having sexual relations with my own brother, to being called a baby birthing machine at the age of 13. All these things have stuck with me, and I will forever live between the ages of 13 to 17 in many of my viewers' minds. In addition, pedophiles stalk the internet, specifically seeking out child influencers. I promise you that the parents are aware of these predators and choose to post their children anyway. I want to be absolutely clear that there is no amount of money that can justify selling your soul as a child to the world. In no other industry would we justify unregulated child labor with a huge paycheck, and we should not do that here. If I could go back and do it all again, I'd rather have an empty bank account now and not have my childhood plastered all over the internet. No amount of money I received has made what I've experienced worth it. Family vlogging ruined my innocence long before Ruby committed a crime. I promise you that my experiences are not unique and are happening to child influencers all over Utah and the country. So let's tackle this issue before it becomes a bigger crisis than it already is.
Shari Franke has an interest in politics that it's grown over the last few years. I'm not surprised, given how eloquent her words were, how powerful her words were before this committee. Not easy to do, it makes sense. And she also posted on Instagram in May of 2023 saying, as amazing as law school would be, I'm now wanting to pursue a doctorate degree in the political field, and who knows where I'll go from there. But I did want to ask you about this. She also wrote a book about her experiences, this memoir called The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom. It's set to be released in January, and the description for the book reads, for the first time, Shari will reveal the disturbing truth behind 8 passengers and her family's devastating involvement with Jodi Hildebrandt's cultish life coaching program connections. No stone is left unturned as Shari exposes the perils of influencer culture and shares for the first time her battle for truth and survival in the face of her mother's cruelty. And Brian, what else do we know about this book? I imagine it's going to mirror a lot of what she just said in front of that committee.
It'll be interesting to see how it's received by the world that had so much interest in this case because of the fame on social media and then what you saw after the fact. What's interesting about it is this is just one of the many things that is coming out about this family, right? There's a movie that is coming out about them. There's probably a couple docuseries that will be coming out at some point. In addition to everything else that's already been put out. I mean, so many media outlets have already put out different pieces of this puzzle and put it all together, but who better to hear from than somebody that's kind of got it all figured out and knows exactly what happened in that home compared to even when the camera was on versus when it was not on, and now can reflect on this from perhaps the most unique perspective you could ask for. I'd be interested to see what's in the book. I'm sure there will be no stone unturned, but at the end of the day, we've heard a lot of details about what's happened with this family over the years. There's a lot of interest, and I'm sure it'll have a lot of reads, especially early on.
Now, I also had the chance to speak with Jeremy Deus. This is a former Salt Lake County district attorney. He's now a defense attorney in private practice. And we talked a little bit about the law in Utah. All right, Jeremy, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. I think we should start, if you know, before we even get into what Shari Franke was saying, Do you know of any protections that are currently put in place in Utah regarding child vloggers, child influencers, or is this really an uncharted area that Shari Franke is now finally putting some light on?
This is largely new territory in the state of Utah. So yeah, we're kind of treading new water here.
And it makes sense, right? When Shari says that these children are essentially employees. It's almost like child labor, given the amount of time that they put into it, the idea of compensation. Do you agree with that proposition that they're essentially employees?
But I think so. I don't think it's much different than, say, a parent who owns a business. I mean, if you look at me as an attorney, if I bring a child in to maybe help me file some stuff, move some stuff along, it is a business, right? And so if you're having them come in and do work that presumably brings value, I mean, yeah, I think you can make that argument.
And we're seeing laws popping up in other states where they regulate family vloggers and children being participants in this social media content. I'll give you an example. In California, the parents of social media influencers now have to set aside 15% of the kids' earnings. It's placed in a trust for them until they turn 18. It used to be only that was applied to child actors. Now it's been expanded to influencers. Not a surprise. I mean, we're seeing a lot of younger people on social media earning income. Earning income and compensation. I was joking. I mean, and that's not a surprise since we're seeing a lot of young people on social media making content or making content with their families. It's another way of performing for money. And then in Illinois, if you are 16 years or younger now, you have to be paid if these children appear in 30% or more of their parents' social media content over a 30-day period. And the number of views have to be enough that you actually generate money. So as we're seeing these transitions in other states, what are your thoughts on that?
But I think that's the sticking point, right? Is how much is the actual compensation? You mentioned in California, it's 15%. I'm sure that the legislature in Utah would be looking at things as far as how they came up with that number. Obviously, the parents are doing a lot. Sometimes it's not always monetary. I mean, sometimes when you're talking about these vloggers and what they do, sometimes the compensation to the parents are trips for the family, trips to Disneyland, trips to Hawaii, trips across the country. So the question is, how do you value that overall? And how do you then break down the percentage that the children should be entitled to? I think that's going to be kind of hard to value. Obviously, they can value it, but it would certainly be a sticking point.
Just to clarify the point, if there was a law in Utah, what do you think a law in Utah should look like? Is there something specific with Utah that makes it different? And the reason I say that when we talk about what would a law look like is because Shari Franke was pointing out that there is something specific with respect to Utah. She said there's a lot of vloggers. Vlogging is very popular because of the Latter-day Saints families. They want to share their religion, their lifestyle with others. And there might be, she said, an advantage to have a larger family, more people, more content. That becomes more lucrative. So as we think about Utah and we think about what a new law would be regarding child vlogging, what do you think it should look like?
So, I mean, if we're talking about laws related to child vlogging specifically, I think it's difficult because you start to get into different terrain there. I mean, I think overall there's this presumption that we rely on parents to be able to parent their children as appropriate, as they deem appropriate, understanding that there may be some disagreement as far as how some people parent. I mean, the question is it criminal? I don't think it's necessarily the state's job to step in and say, hey, here's how you're supposed to parent your children. I think the biggest issue as it relates to bloggers is compensation. So what does that look like? I think Utah should look at states that deal with it more frequently. I think probably something that more closely mimics maybe something like California, because this isn't necessarily something new for California with the entertainment industry. You're looking at a lot of child actors. So I think that's probably something that Utah would have to look at in order to kind of come up with legislation for compensation. I see this for the most part more a compensation issue than I necessarily do the legislature stepping in and saying, hey, if you're going to be a vlogger, like these are the specific how to raise your kids standards
Right.
we want you to come up with.
And it makes a difference whether or not you have a child who is engaging in social media content on their own, not even including their family, versus the family, the parents are in a way taking their children as part of their content, right? I mean,
Right.
I guess that matters in terms of sharing compensation, or does it? Because if you have a child who says, hey, mom and dad, I'm just going to create some videos of me doing gymnastics on my own, they say, okay, we'll do whatever. Do the parents, should they be entitled to some of that compensation that their child is bringing in separately? Or is it only if the parents are kind of, I don't want to say coercing, but if the parents are, you know, allowing their children or using their children to be part of their own content? I guess there's a difference there.
I think you're right. I think there is a difference there. At that point, I think if the child is going out there and they're doing it themselves, they're kind of coming up with the scripts, the content, they're editing it themselves, they're putting it out there for people to see. I mean, it becomes a very different scenario, right? And then kind of as the parent, I guess your role would just be as a driver to steer whatever money your child is making, depending on how old they are, and put that into something that would be there for a child. And I think something like a trust would likely be appropriate, because you certainly don't want 14 and 15-year-olds who are making their own content and making potentially conceivably ridiculous amounts of money, just having an unfettered access to all of that.
Yeah, because they could waste it, they could spend it, and almost damage themselves in the end. How difficult will it be to pass a law like this in Utah? I'm not familiar with the Utah State Legislature. I'm not sure if you are, but this was a very, very, very high-profile case. Everybody knew about it across this country. Everybody went international news as well. I imagine there could be some sort of pressure put on the state legislature to address this. But you tell me, you're from there. What do you think?
Well, I think you very much have two pretty strong aspects in the Utah legislature. As far as my experience with it and my read of the Utah legislature, is you have a very conservative, almost more libertarian aspect of it, where they want government in your lives as little as possible. With something like this case, with the Franke case and the Hildebrand case, something that I think they're going to try to be very careful with, at least portions of the legislature, is, I mean, everybody is so concerned about what happened. It got national news. It's high profile. You don't want to make a knee-jerk decision just based on that alone. I think the things that the legislature is going to want to focus on overall is, like we talked about, payment, and really at the end of the day, something that's been floated that I do think is a good idea, and I think it's something that all legislators should be able to get behind, is this notion that once a child is a part of this family vlog, whatever it is, as they get older, if they become 18, 19, 20 years old, or even maybe 16, 17, with the help of a professional, go to mom and dad and say, hey, I don't want this content that's out there of me out on the internet anymore. Yeah. I think that they should have a right and an ability to request mom and dad to take that down. I think there are certain things that everybody can get behind, but you're really going to tread in rough waters if it feels like the legislature is stepping in and saying, hey, this is how you're supposed to parent. This is what you're going to do. That could be where the fight is at the end of the day.
All right, there you have it, everybody. Another update in the Ruby Franke case. Thank you so much for joining us here on Sidebar. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.